Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. So welcome to another episode of the Christian Apologetics series. And I wish you guys all today happy Easter, happy Passover. And now, I don't know if you guys know the real meaning behind this day that we're celebrating. I don't know if you know it, but today we're gonna take a look at this. And we're gonna just try to analyze, which are the events that are grounded and that this story took place and how this celebration was born and yeah. So first of all, we're talking here about a Judeo-Christian festivity and kind of celebration, because of the fact that in the Eastern culture, Western Eastern culture, the Passover is linked to the resurrection of Jesus. So that's the meaning that today we attribute to the festivities, so to this celebration of Easter, of Passover. But in reality, this celebration is linked to something that happened on the Old Testament in the Bible. And it's when the Jewish people were able to finally get free and exit from Egypt. They were being held captives, they were being held slaves in Egypt. And when they were able to get free, and when God, through Moses, freed them through, of all of this, that's when God instituted this new feast, this celebration that they had to repeat and to remember every single year, to remember about the delivery, of God, and how he was able to just make them free and go into the promised land. Now, the two festivities here, so like the Old Testament Passover and then the New Testament resurrection of Jesus, are actually linked. Because if we go to the Gospels and we try to analyze, you're gonna see that when Jesus was being the trial of Jesus, and then when he was actually condemned, when he was crucified, and when Jesus died, you can see that there is a verse that says that the Passover was coming. And when the Bible refers to Passover, it's actually to the Old Testament festivity. So we're talking about that celebration, all right? And because of that, you can see there that it's the festivity that it's coming between like the death of Jesus, the after Jesus died was actually the Passover day. So it was a day that no one could do any kind of work, and that's why if you see carefully, you can see that after the Shabbat, so after the Passover was over, that's when the women approached to the tomb and they were going to prepare Jesus properly, because Jesus' body, he had died. He had just been, Jesus' body was just encircled with something, something just to keep the body inside the tomb. The tomb was closed. The tomb was guarded by Roman guards. And, the women, 2 days after, so the day after it was the Passover. And the day right after Passover, you can see here that on Matthew chapter 28 verse 1 says, after the Shabbat, at dawn on the first day of the week, so the first day of the week for the Western culture would be Sunday. So today, Sunday would be the first day of the week that we can read here. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. So you can see here that because they couldn't go into the tomb and they couldn't prepare Jesus on the celebration day, so on Passover, they had to wait 1 day. And you can see that when they went to the tomb, they find it that it's empty. And then it's very nice to see that then Jesus, appears to the women. Then the disciples go to check into the tomb. They find it also empty. And then Jesus appears in front of all the disciples, and we can, you can just continue reading the story. But what I really want to focus here is the explanations about this fact. You see, because the resurrection is a supernatural event, something that normally doesn't occur, right? And so there are certain facts that many people tend to not believe in, right? They might believe that Jesus existed. They might believe that Jesus was crucified, that Jesus died, that Jesus was put into the tomb, that then the body of Jesus disappeared, but they don't believe in the resurrection. And therefore, they try to offer different explanations as to why or how the body of Jesus disappeared. And there are many, many different kind of explanations here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but for example, one explanation is that Jesus never actually died. The second is that they put inside the tomb another person and not the real Jesus, so it was like an imposter. The third explanation is that the disciples somehow were able to defeat or to sneak in through the normal guards, and they were able to take the body of Jesus away. They were able to hide it, and then they went on to proclaim that Jesus had resurrected, even though it wasn't true. And of course, then we have the explanation that the Gospels tell us, that Jesus actually did resurrect. And if you try to analyze each of these options, you can see that each option just fails to answer, in a reasonable way to all the different problems that we have. For example, the fact that Jesus never died. See, we have so many external manuscripts that are not Christian, so non-Christian sources of history that speak about this Jesus that was condemned, that died, that was crucified, and therefore we have different ways of knowing that this Jesus that we're talking here died. So it wasn't like he wasn't buried alive, or it wasn't an imposter that was placed in the tomb. No, it was just that Jesus did die. And then we have to answer to the main question, that is then how the body disappeared, right? Because the body did disappear. And today I'm going to just focus here about one of the explanations that is given to us as to how the body disappeared. That is that the disciples were able to take the body. So the disciples went in, somehow sneaked through the guards, were able to take the body, and they hid the body, and then they went on to proclaim that Jesus had resurrected, and they were just made up, a huge lie, and they just went on to, continue this, the beliefs on their master, right? Even though it wasn't true. And now I'm gonna actually read some verses because I think that this explanation is the most common one, and it's the one that has a lot of different sub-categories into it. And we're going to read some verses here because it's very, very interesting what's happening. If you go to Matthew chapter 28 again, and you look and you read verse 2 and verse 4, you can see here that it says, "There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men." So this is what happens as the women, are approaching the tomb and are coming into the tomb. So the women then arrive to the tomb, and the angel says to them, "Who are you looking for?" And they say, "We're looking for Jesus. Have you taken him?" And the angel replies, "He's not here. He's risen, as he had said." And then if you just continue the story, you go to verse 11, it says here, "While the women were on their way to tell the disciples that the tomb was empty, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened." You see, it was the chief priests that had put the guards guarding Jesus' tomb, because they knew that the disciples could try to get the body and to invent the lie that Jesus had resurrected, because Jesus himself has said that he would resurrect. So because the chief priests knew about it, they really wanted to make sure that it wouldn't happen. And then here verse 12 it says, "When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." And it's very interesting here what Matthew says in the verse 15. Look, hear this. "So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed." And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. And now it's very interesting here because you see that it looks like it wasn't the disciples that came up with this idea of, stealing the body of Jesus and then proclaiming that he had been risen, even if it didn't. But it was actually the chief priests. They were the ones that invented, this story that the disciples had taken the body, and that's why the body had, disappeared. And it's very interesting to notice here that this story here is the one that's the most common that was still circulating among the Jews. Matthew wrote the gospel around 15 to 20 years after Jesus allegedly resurrected. And therefore, quite a lot of time had occurred between the resurrection, the actual resurrection, and when the gospel was written. So around 15 to 20 years, right? And if you see then, like in those 20 years, you can imagine how common it was for Jews to talk, about the hot topics. And one of the hot topics probably was the body of Jesus, that had disappeared. Because you had like two accounts, right? You had the disciples, they're from one side were saying, we have seen Jesus, he has risen, he's really the Son of God, believe in him to be saved, and so on. They were just preaching the gospel. And then on the other account, you had the chief priests and all their followers, right, that were spreading the account that the disciples had stolen the body of Jesus, and so that all of that they were saying was false. That wasn't true. So you had these two main accounts circulating. So the disciples' testimony and then the chief priest's testimony about this story. And it's very interesting because nowadays, one of the most common explanations that are given to justify how the body of Jesus disappeared is actually this one, that the disciples came in and stole the body. And now this account can be also confutated very easily if you just try to analyze the whole logic and all the events that happened. And I'm going to just try to be very quick here. So the first thing is that we're talking here about Roman guards. You see here that this story is about that the disciples were able to sneak in as the guards were sleeping. But if you go into history and you read the Roman kind of military, you will perfectly know that Romans were always taking watch guards. So that means that there was always at least one guard awake, one or two guards awake during the full period of the night, just in case there would be ambushes or things like that, right? So it never happened that all the guards were sleeping at the same time. There were always at least one or two guards awake, keeping watch. And then after 3 hours, there was another set of guards taking watch, and so on. So they just alternated each other. So it would not be possible for anyone to sneak in during the night because there would be someone awake. So this is the first, kind of shaky thing, that it would be very uncommon for all the guards to be asleep. But then another problem is the huge stone that was placed on top of, on the front of the tomb, right? Even if the disciples, came, imagine that the disciples are, 15, 20, right? The full amount that went in, it would be very hard for them, imagine, to roll the stone without doing any noise, right? Imagine them trying to roll this pretty heavy and huge stone while not making any noise, because otherwise it would wake up the guards that supposedly would be sleeping. So that's the second thing that's very, very, it's very unreasonable to believe that it would not happen. But let's suppose it did happen, right? let's suppose that somehow they were able to sneak in and they were able to take the body away. Now, the huge problem comes into the lie itself. Why would the disciples spread the lie? So if Jesus hadn't resurrected, right, why would they gain from lying? So what they would gain from inventing the story of Jesus resurrected, right? If you look carefully at the story of the disciples and what happened to all of them, they were all persecuted, tortured, imprisoned, and almost all of them died for their faith. They died because of what they were proclaiming. So they died because of Jesus, because of the gospel. They died because they kept on saying that Jesus had risen, that Jesus was the Son of God, that Jesus was the only way to the Father, that Jesus was the only way to be saved. That's the reason why they were persecuted and they were killed. So, like, they didn't gain anything. They didn't gain any power. They didn't gain any prestigious position. They didn't gain any riches, because all the apostles, like all the disciples, weren't really rich. They were imprisoned. They lost probably a lot of things they had. So they didn't gain anything that would normally motivate someone to lie. You see, no one really lies or let's say it like that. No one affirms something to be true, even if they know it's false, if they don't gain anything. So if you know that something is not true, you're not going to lie about it unless you're gaining something. All right? So it's very unreasonable to say that the disciples decided to lie only to be tortured and killed. Right? If the disciples knew that there would be no heaven, that Jesus hadn't resurrected, that Jesus wasn't the Son of God, then there would be no point in lying. Right? So it's like completely unreasonable to say that they decided to lie despite the fact that they knew it was a lie. Now, there is another theory here that adds up, that says that the disciples they believed they have seen the real Jesus, but it didn't really happen. So it was an hallucination. The hallucination theory, probably you have known about it. You have heard about it. This also is something that can be disputed very easily by nowadays science. Psychology and psychiatry nowadays say that groupal hallucinations cannot be shared in the exact same way with the exact same details. So, like, if there is a group that is under the effect of some drugs, it's impossible that every single person can hallucinate about the same subject, same events in the same way. It just doesn't happen. Everyone hallucinates something different. Everyone remembers something different. They don't remember the same event, the same person, and the same thing. So again, it's very unreasonable to believe that the disciples had a massive group of hallucination. They all thought to have seen Jesus when in reality it didn't happen. And so again, it's just an unreasonable explanation. And so we're left with just one reasonable answer, right? That these events actually did occur. That Jesus actually had risen, that he showed to the disciples, and that he's showing to his disciples actually make them change so much. Because remember, the disciples were afraid. The disciples were hidden because they thought that they would kill them as well. And then how it's possible? How can we explain the huge transformation of the disciples, right? From being super afraid, being hidden, they were afraid to be killed, to being super courageous. They were going outside. They weren't caring anymore about being persecuted or being killed. And they were just announcing that Jesus had risen, that Jesus was the Son of God. You see, the only reasonable explanation that can explain such a huge transformation of a behavior of a human being can only be defined by something that truly happened. No lie, nothing, not even brainwashing can make you change behavior in such a way without going crazy, of course. The disciples weren't crazy. They were pretty reasonable people and they stayed reasonable after. So there is no brainwashing here. There is no way that the disciples became crazy, and so they knew something to be true even though it wasn't, you see. So the only theory that holds up, that explains all the evidence and all the data that we have around, is actually that Jesus did resurrect, that Jesus did present himself alive again after he had died, and that the resurrection is true. You see, the resurrection is the only historical event, supernatural event, from which there is logical evidence, for which there is so much cumulative evidence that it's just the most reasonable answer, because it's the only explanation that can fulfill all the different evidence and all the different data that we have about the disciples, about the tomb, about the body, about Roman guards, about everything in history, you know, and knowing what happened to the disciples and knowing everything around them. So, yeah, see, it's, I just wanted to make this video. Maybe you guys didn't know about it, but I think it's very, very nice to know, and that, you know, our Christian belief, the resurrection, it's a key thing on Christianity. So if we know how to defend it, if we know that we will believe an event that actually took place, that is a true event, this is based on true things, then of course it's something that can just make us stronger. You know, it can make us really understand that we're not just believing blindly, we're not just believing in an unreasonable way, but we're believing because of the evidence. We're believing because of it's the most reasonable explanation for all the evidence that we have. So I hope you guys enjoyed. God bless you, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.